Hi everyone, so my name is Connor Shearer and I am the Senior Property Manager at Live. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes. I'm really sorry for the slight delay in starting here. We're just having a few technical issues with getting the fire engineer on the call. So if you just give us a couple of minutes, we'll get that sorted, we'll begin the presentation and then we'll have the question and answer session. That'd be brilliant. So the fire engineer is just trying to join the call, as I was just saying. So if there is any delays, it is due down to this. He's just attempting.
Connor, I'm here now.
Hi Neil, can you hear me okay, Neil?
Yes, I can now, thank you.
Brilliant, that's great. So I think everyone can hear us. Brilliant. So we'll make a start then. As we get onto the bits where Neil will be taking over, Neil will become present on the screen in the place that I'm in. Yeah, brilliant. So we'll make a start on the presentation. So the first thing to go over is who is on the call today. That is myself. I'm the Senior Property Manager at Live Group, and I'm responsible for the day-to-day management of the Salle and Mackenzie house. And I've been in this position since January 2019 on these developments. In terms of design fire consultants, we've got Neil Butterworth that's joining us to provide us a bit of technical knowledge. Neil was appointed to this project in March 2020 as the fire engineer on the project. We've also got on the call, we've got some of our senior members of staff, Helen Peace, who's the Senior Operations Director for the Live Group, and Dave Gray, the regional manager, are participating and listening into the call. So if there's anything more senior that requires a bit of help from them, they'll be able to chip in and provide some feedback to myself to provide to you guys as the leaseholders. So before we start, I just want to set the housekeeping rules as such. You don't need to record the call. The call is recorded. We'll be posting a copy to our website very shortly after this has been completed. The next session, we haven't got a date yet, but we do intend to keep things going in this method. We like this format and we're very happy with the way it goes. You might hear during our discussion, we use the phrase Project Artemis. This is not something to be alarmed by, it's just the way that the name of the project as we call it internally. And this is what our third party suppliers have been using on the project. If your question isn't answered, we're keeping a track of all the questions. So at the end of this session, we're able to do a special edition of the newsletter, which we'll be sending out, and that will hopefully answer any questions that we've not had the opportunity to answer today. The session will be limited to 60 minutes. That's because we're obviously taking up time from people such as Neil and other elements. But as I say, we'll get to any questions that we miss on our newsletters. And lastly, how do you ask a question? We're going to start with the presentation. That'll take up a majority of the time. Any time that's left will be when we answer the questions. To ask a question, you just need to send an email to leadstock@livegroup.co.uk. You can send this during the session or you can send it during the question and answer time. At the end, we'll answer as many as possible. All we advise is you start the email with the words Q&A and put your building name next to this so that we know which building you're referring to when you ask the questions. On the project, so this is where we want to be able to provide a little bit of detail to the people that have been involved in the project to date. So Liv was appointed as the managing agent to the building. Liv's role on a day-to-day basis is to manage the service charge in accordance with the management agreement and in line with the lease of the building. Liv's role in this project is to work with all parties to progress the project, to oversee communications and carry out the general day-to-day administration of the project. We've then got the building surveyors. Now we appointed CBRE as the original building surveyors and they complete the building reports in both stages. That's the stage 1 and the stage 2. We're providing a little bit of clarity on what the difference in those stages is later on in the presentation. But these reports are fundamentally what have been used by the fire engineers. The fire engineers appointed, which is, as we say, we've got Neil on the call with us today. This is design fire consultants. They was appointed in March following the stage 2 report's conclusion, and they've conducted a thorough review of the building and provided a detailed analysis to the situation along with some remediation advice. Before we get into the nitty-gritty details of the actual buildings, I think it's really important that we provide a timeline of what's happened and how we've got to this stage today. So in 2017, following the Grenfell tragedy, guidance was issued for the ACM testing on buildings in general. We immediately completed this testing and there was no raise of concern from the ACM on the building. There is no ACM on the buildings, so we were very happy with that. Following this, the government began to work on a much more thorough guidance, and in December 2018, Advice Notice 14 was issued to the industry. Immediately following this, we began to plan how we was going to tackle this in our portfolio across the board, not just focused on the lid stock sites. Once we've done this, we've done the planning, the tendering, and appointing the correct contractors. Now, I think it's really important that we stress at this point that obviously following the Advice Notice release, there was quite a lot of requests made to surveyors to get this sort of survey completed, and there was a shortage of surveyors in the industry. In March 2019, we completed the tender exercise and we began to formally work on planning for the next step, which was completing the stage 1 and stage 2 surveys. So we appointed CBRE. CBRE, when they completed their stage 1 survey, they completed an analysis based on the O&Ms, which is the documents from the original build, the original planning application, along with the other elements that needed to be considered. When we was planning to do these surveys, it did take a significant amount of time, more so than what we anticipated. The reason being that this was the case was that we not only had to consider how we were going to access the various points, we also had to consider the elements of where the buildings were positioned. For more information on that, it's an area that is obviously next to the dock and there is weight restrictions in place, and we was using specialised machines to get into certain elevations. Once we've done this, and we did the stage 1 surveys, we completed the stage 2 surveys by CBRE once again. Once we got to January 2020, this was roughly when we received the stage 2 reports, we immediately realised that there were some serious problems that needed to be reviewed by an appropriate engineer. As we did this, we appointed DFC to the project, and they was appointed in March 2020. And then this is where we now begin the stage of reviewing the information, and this is when Neil's team stepped on board to the project and began finalising their reports. In June and July, we returned to site and completed some further investigations just to clarify the information that we gathered in our stage 2 surveys. Neil's team looked over all the original documentation that CBRE looked over, and then they also provided their own analysis on the buildings. So that's just an updated timeline to say how we got to this level and where we are up to today. So Neil is going to go into a little bit of detail about the project in terms of where each building is individually. He's going to start with Mackenzie House and then move on to Salle, and he'll be able to give a little bit of background into what we found when we completed them inspections.
Thanks, Connor. So in terms of Mackenzie House, one of the first things that we look at is some of the basic building information that's important from a fire perspective. Firstly, of course, it's a block of flats. The evacuation strategy is important for that, and it's a defend in place or a stay put strategy, or at least it was, and that means that occupants can stay in their flats if there's a fire elsewhere in the building. and the basis of that is that the fire should be contained, any fire would be contained in the flat of fire origin. We look at the number of stories, but what that relates to is the height of the topmost story. In this instance, it's 26 meters. The importance of that is to do whether the fire service can actually fight a fire from outside the building or not. If the building's low enough, they can use their equipment to stop fire spread up the outside of the building from outside. But as the building gets higher, or as buildings are higher, the fire service are not able to reach the upper parts of the building. The critical height that gets used is 18 meters, so it's assumed below 18 meters the fire service can have an impact, but above 18 meters they wouldn't have an impact. We also look at the fire service vehicle access, and there's good access to the elevations on Chadwick Street, but obviously the fire service can't get onto the dockside elevations. We then looked at the information that was given to us by CBRE doing the surveying, and we also looked at the as-built drawings that we were able to get hold of to find out what external wall systems there were or there are and where they are on the building. We identified 6 systems: brickwork, a Stotherm Classic system, which is a polystyrene insulation with a render top coat on it. I'll show you where those are in the next slide, so you'll understand that from your knowledge of the buildings. There's a Promisol cladding system, sandstone cladding at the lower levels, an aluminium curtain walling system, and some cedar board cladding around some of the balcony areas. We look at the materials used in each of those external wall systems for how likely they are to burn and what their burning characteristics would be if they are ignited. And we also look at the wall systems to see whether there are fire breaks within the wall systems that would stop any burning should the materials themselves be ignited. We use what's called Approved Document B to assess the wall constructions against. Approved Document B is a government approved guidance document that designers would use when they're designing and building a building. It gives advice on the fire stops and the fire breaks that should be provided in external wall and cladding systems, and it gives advice on the combustibility of the materials that can be used. We did our assessment using the approved document that was relevant at the time of construction. There's no explicit requirement for buildings to retrospectively comply with new standards, so it's reasonable and appropriate to review the buildings with what was expected at the time of the construction. We use these documents as guidance. You don't have to comply with all of the guidance, and sometimes there are ways to achieve an adequate standard of safety without actually having complied with all of the recommendations within the document. So we're not using it in a totally black and white sense. We're also using our engineering judgment and experience to determine whether systems are adequately safe or not. But that guidance is used as a benchmark. There are 2 of the systems that do include combustible materials or significant quantities of combustible material. That's the cedar board cladding. The timber cedar boarding itself is combustible, and in the Stotherm Classic render system, the insulation itself is a polystyrene which is combustible and can ignite and burn quite readily. The investigations show that for the Stotherm system, the fire breaks that should be in place had a polystyrene piece of insulation going over the top of those fire breaks that in effect bypass the fire breaks and render them ineffective. This is something that should not have been installed in the first place. So you can have rendered polystyrene insulation systems that can be safe, but the system that was installed on Mackenzie didn't meet the recommendations or the requirements at the time for rendered polystyrene insulation. That's by and large due to a lack of adequate fire barriers provided at floor junctions. We've also found in some of the other constructions lack of adequate fire barriers, and so what we're recommending is that to achieve an adequate resistance to fire spread, combustible insulation, particularly on the Stotherm Classic, needs to be removed, and there need to be adequate fire breaks installed where they're missing at junctions with floors and at junctions between party walls between flats. Connor, do you move on to the next slide, or do I do it now? There we go. This slide just shows where those various forms of construction are on Mackenzie House. So from the photos, the white coloured cladding system is the render. You can see on the bottom picture some of the timber locations, but hopefully the diagrams on the right can explain where the various forms of construction are that we found and their extent of coverage. If I move on to the next slide. So now looking at Salle, again, similar process of looking at the building description and the types of construction. You'll note very similar constructions. In this case, there were 5 constructions, a Yorkstone cladding, what's called a CLG wall plank construction. You've got the Stotherm Classic again, aluminium glazed curtain walling, and a glazed curtain walling system. Again, we've went through the assessment in exactly the same way with very similar findings. In this instance, it's the CG wall plank system that includes combustible materials and insulation along with the Stotherm Classic, with the same conclusion that the Stotherm Classic render system doesn't achieve an adequate standard because of the polystyrene insulation and the lack of adequate fire barriers, and similarly for the CGL wall plank system. So again, it's a very similar recommendation that in order to achieve an adequate standard, the combustible insulation needs to be removed and adequate fire barriers need to be put in place where they are missing. And the next slide just shows again where the various wall types are on the elevation of Salle. So I think that's me, Connor, if I hand back to you.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thanks for that, Neil. I'm sure we might have some questions at the end about some of the information there, but we'll cross that bridge once we get to it. So the next question on everyone's mind is obviously our next steps and where we're up to with the Build Safety Fund. Is where we're going to start when we talk about this. So the Build Safety Fund is the government funding which has been brought out in light of the non-ACM materials on the buildings. At the moment, we've completed the pre-application steps, and we completed that in the target zone that we've been given. Now, to be Just to explain the target zones on this, where we've got the November 2020 and the December 2020 and the 2021. These are the targets that we've been expressed by MHLGC, which is the Ministry of Housing, Local Government and Communities. And these are where we would envision that we will complete each area of the application. This is not a definite area yet, so these times may adapt slightly in the future. We will see as that goes on. The government is still in the process of confirming these and sorting these out. So at the moment, we've registered our interest in the fund. We've provided the information from the reports that we've conducted. We've had confirmation of this, and we had a call with them recently where we was able to establish that information is currently under review. Once that review has been completed, we will be able to begin our full application, completing the first stage. To complete the first stage of the application, we provide a lot of information on an online application portal, in which then the government completes a legal review of that information. Very shortly after that, a short form agreement would be created if we are eligible for some funding, to which point we then go on to the second stage of the full application if that agreement is signed and move forward. Once we do that, we submit some tender for the cost of the works, and the government will then begin to assess the eligibility and make a funding decision. Once we've completed that, the works begin and they do some monitoring before the practical completion of the project. So this is the next steps in terms of the funding side of the element of the project for the Building Safety Fund. So how we can get ahead of that at the moment, we're already in the process of beginning. So we are going to be sending out to leaseholders in the next couple of weeks some Section 20 information. The Section 20 is a legal requirement by leasehold law that we have to send out. It doesn't mean that the bill is coming to leaseholders, and we'll be providing more information with that. It's just a process and a hurdle that we've got to complete over the course of this project. Along with this, we are going to be sending out the state aid declarations. Now, this is a requirement from the government when they're going to be issuing any type of funding to the project, that every leaseholder must get this signed. So we will be sending this out. We're beginning the process of tracking and monitoring it. We're not going to use the information as of yet. It does come later on in the funding application, but we want to get ahead of the game and make sure we've got this information already signed, already on file, so that when it is required, we're able to progress our application at the speediest rate possible. So the government have issued some form of guidance on this, and we've not had any definite discussion with them on the guidance. We understand that this is a big part of it. What will the government cover for our next steps? So they have issued a guidance which explains that it will not be covering the wake and watch, that this is an operational expense, and that this at the moment is currently being recharged through the service charge. We would advise that people do look at the guidance that the government have issued, have a read of it, understand it, and be able to move forward with it. If the Building Safety Fund doesn't cover something that has to be done, for example, it does mention on there at the moment that it doesn't cover balconies, we will obviously engage with the government, understand why it doesn't cover the balconies, if there is any areas where it may cover the balconies, and we will fully understand. Once we've got this information, we can then begin to process this, work with the freeholders, and clarify any future steps and any future decisions. We believe that it should remain as part of this project to minimise the cost. We don't want to go completing works to then have to complete further works in the future for other areas that require completion. We'll ensure you're up to date, consulted, and make sure you're given appropriate time to review any information on any element that may fall into this area which may not be covered by the Building Safety Fund. That does also include if there is any other funding that can be gained. Part is implementing the remedial advice. So this is the advice that we need to implement in order to get ourselves in line with the recommendations that has come from Neil and his team. So these dates on this are just example dates, not the current dates that we will be working towards. These are where we envision the timing will take us and how long it will take us to implement this information. So when we complete this area of the project, there will be further appointments to the project. We are in the works of getting the finalised quotes for this now so that the freeholders are able to make a decision on how we progress. We'll be working with a project manager who will be coming on board to the project, and they will, on their instruction, we will also have cost assessors appointed to the project to make sure that not only are we working to the best of the ability and to the best cost available to leaseholders, but we're also working for the best cost available in the industry and for the government funding application, which we're currently ongoing with. Once we complete this, we'll be doing a tender exercise and a tender review. Once we have this information, this is when we will know how much the project of remediation is going to cost across the board. And that is when we'll be able to share some actual costings. But at this time, we don't have the costings, unfortunately. We would like to get ourselves in that position as soon as possible, and that is what we're working towards now. Once the contractor is appointed and a detailed design is developed, that is when we will begin the construction works in a nice basic order. The EWS1 form will not be produced until the final account has been completed. This is because whoever is signing that form will require to be able to see that the building does meet the requirements of the EWS1 form. We understand that can be a little bit frustrating for leaseholders, and we offer our sympathy on that, especially to those that are looking to remortgage or sell their properties. We'll be working to the best that we can to get that moving forward as quickly as possible, and we'll be constantly talking with surveyors and with the fire engineers and their team to understand if there is any way we can speed up that process. So that is how we will be implementing the remedial advice at this stage. We'll obviously keep you guys updated as we move forward, and we'll move on to the next slide. So the next slide is the safety measures that we've put in place today. I think a really key element of this project is always to remember that we have to put the safety of the occupants of the building first, and that is what we are working towards in the end. So we immediately had to employ a working watch, and this was following several meetings with West Yorkshire Fire Service. We immediately inputted a working watch across our 4 developments that we have on in stock, and we believe that a systematic approach across our 4 buildings would work to be better and would work to help save leaseholders money in the long run. We have since developed a new strategy which we have put in place for a wider estate approach, and have teamed up with other managing agents in the area to have an approach across the board. Liv headed up that project and moved it forward with the help of our fire engineer, who also consulted, and with the help of the other managing agents who was very on board with moving this forward. At the moment, the working watch operatives complete patrol across the development. As you can see the patrol route on your screens now, and they complete a full internal patrol every 6-hour cycle, in which they're making sure that all escape routes are cleared. The guards are fully trained, and they're given regular debriefs to ensure that they have the emergency training in place to react in the event of a fire. The whole estate system is a similar approach to what we originally completed, and overall it is a great benefit to leaseholders with the cost savings that we've got. As you can see on the screen now, the cost average per leaseholder, and I know that this is an average as apportionments are not considered on these graphics, but the average per leaseholder is roughly around £48. Some will pay less, some will pay more. Without this approach, we could be looking at costs anywhere between £180 to £280 per calendar month. We understand that this cost, even at a reduced rate, is not the cost that leaseholders want at this time. And while the substantial savings have been made by this shared system, we still want to work to rectify the issues as soon as possible and not require the working watch in place. We will continue to work with West Yorkshire Fire to establish when the working watch can be removed from site. I presume it will be at the end of construction, but we will continue to monitor that, work with West Yorkshire Fire, and understand when they will be satisfied that the residents are no longer put at any more increased risk. So we just wanted to take some opportunity while we've got leaseholders on the call, just to go over the evacuation procedure for the dock that's been put in place for all buildings on the dock now. So we've got the 2 assembly points which are located. Assembly point 2 will only be utilised for any evacuation that does not involve Cartier House, which is not the building that we are discussing today. So Mackenzie House and Salle will attend assembly point 1 or assembly point 2, and they would do so following hearing of a siren or an air horn in the communal areas. If it is your property, you should vacate immediately and contact your nearest waking watch operative who will be around. We want to ask leaseholders to make sure that they pass this information on to their tenants, onto their letting agents, and that it is really, really drilled into people. The building is a no smoking building now, and we ask leaseholders to pass this on to their tenants as well. It's really important that we all work together to make sure that the safety is met for all occupants of the building. We don't want to see any disaster at these buildings, and we want to make sure that it's a safe environment for everybody to live in. Now we've come to the end of the presentation, where we've been able to pass across some details from the project and where it is up to date, and we're going to begin by answering a few questions that have been sent in from yourselves. I understand that there's been lots of questions sent in, so we're not going to be able to answer all the questions during this session. We'll do our best to answer as many as possible, but as we've said, we'll be keeping track of all the questions and we'll answer as many as possible via our newsletter in the future. So I think I'll start with the first question, which is most likely directed towards Liv, is when we will be able to share the full reports. At this moment, we don't have a definite date. We envision it will be in the near future. We need to get the freeholders to agree an actual date, but following this presentation where we've been able to share the details, we don't envision that it will take much longer for this to go ahead. Another question which is directed towards Liv is, will the Waking Watch be required during the works? Yes, as we went through earlier, we will continue to work with West Yorkshire Fire to understand how long the Waking Watch will be required for. We obviously want to remove that cost burden from leaseholders as soon as possible. Once we're able to do so, we will, but that will remain in place until the risk to residents is reduced. Another question for Liv. Has the building insurance been affected? We haven't been made aware of any increase in premium as of yet. We are awaiting the final figures from the insurance company. The freeholder of this development actually gathers the insurance themselves using their broker, and then it's passed on to the service charge as such. We will then be able to communicate this out. We're not aware of any issues at this stage, and the insurance company have been fully briefed on the matter and have been provided copies of the full reports, so they're able to make a realistic decision on the building. We've got a question here now from Neil, which is, if there were deficiencies with the building at construction stage, shouldn't we have some recourse with the developers or builders? Actually, I think that'd be more appropriate for myself to answer that one. In terms of this, the freeholder is beginning to look over the where it is appropriate to take any legal action against anyone that can do so. Unfortunately, at this time, there's no obvious person to go after for that sort of thing. The buildings were developed by a developer that is no longer around, and unfortunately, while we will continue to look into this and we have a legal team that are exploring that avenue, we have to progress with the project and continue with that on the side. We will obviously do our best. Question for Neil, which is just based on your experience, I believe, is, do you know any other cost-effective way of ensuring the safety that is not such a waking watch method which has been suggested as an interim measure at this time?
The short answer to that is no. It's something that we've looked at on a number of schemes. What you have to balance is the cost of a waking watch versus an alternative, such as an upgraded fire alarm system, and it's about timing. A fire alarm system is very expensive, and if the waking watch was going to be on for a very long time, that becomes more cost effective. But given the programme imposed by government for the cladding remediation, I think that the most cost-effective approach will be with the waking watch, particularly given that it's shared across buildings on the site, and get the works done as quickly as possible so that that waking watch can be stood down as quickly as possible.
Brilliant, that's great, Neil, thank you. One of the questions here is, what is the cost of remediation at this time? It's not something that we're aware of. As we said earlier, we'll be able to answer that once we've done some tendering, and we will get that information out to everyone as soon as possible. It wouldn't be the case where we're able to actually put a figure on it at this time, and we have asked a few experts if they have any idea of any figure whatsoever. Due to the industry being quite new to this area, there's no one that's willing to actually put a figure on that. We've got a question here that will be hopefully answered by Neil. It says that on the information that has been provided, it mainly looks at the cladding on the buildings. Is there areas such as defect that need replacing, such as the balconies?
The two do go hand in hand to some extent, in that whether the balconies need replacing depends on the construction that's around them. It's something that we will look at quite closely. My inclination is that in some instances there is balcony decking that is likely to require replacement, but there'll be some balcony decking that could stay in place if that is the preferred approach.
Brilliant, that's great. We've got a question here which has said that obviously there is obviously a level of anxiety from certain leaseholders with the costing. Can you speculate on a worst case scenario and what this will mean for leaseholders, and if there's any contingency to the government funding, and any figure at all we can give? You know, and as much as we really do want to give a figure, we understand that this is a big part of your lives right now, and that getting some form of figure so that you can understand where you sit is fundamentally what you guys want right now. Unfortunately, we just don't have that information. We want to be at that stage where we have that information. We want to be able to understand where we need to go to get this funding, or what we need to do to help leaseholders in this case, and we really do want to get that, but unfortunately we just don't have that, and we wouldn't want to send out false information with any ballpark figures, that when unfortunately, you know, we're not experts in this area from Live ourselves, and we wouldn't want to put that sort of pressure on anyone such as Neil or any of the building surveyors that have been employed today to give that information out, when unfortunately, you know, it could be a very wild figure come the end of it. One of the next questions is, what is the freeholder's attitude towards the cost of remediation in the event of not being successful with the building safety fund? To be honest, the freeholder has engaged and is very engaged and involved, and is kept up to date on the project. At this moment, we've not had this level of discussion, in a sense that, you know, the primary focus of all of us today has been to make sure that we find out what the problem is, we find out how much it's going to cost to fix it, we make sure that we've got the funding applications in place, that we're progressing that application, and that we're moving forward with that. And then hopefully, you know, we'll see wherever we are with that, and we'll progress from there as we get costings in place. Until we get costings in place, we're not going to speculate on where that money will come from. there is a potential that it does go through the service charge, which could mean that leaseholders will have to have an additional expense. But until we know the figures and we understand the serious impact that will have, we're not able to give that out. I think it's important to make sure that we express that as soon as we have any information on that nature, on that figure, we will be communicating it as soon as possible. I think a lot of the questions that are coming in are based around the cost. I think it's important that we say that once we know that, we will get that out to you guys. We understand that that's a really big part, and that is, fundamentally what is causing quite a lot of anxiety out there, as well as the fact of, is the building safe? One question here for Neil is, did the original installation of the cladding system comply with building regulations at the time?
It's very difficult to answer that question definitively, because the regulations themselves are what are called functional requirements. And for example, the functional requirement in relation to external walls is that they should adequately resist fire spread. You then have the approved document, which provides the approved guidance for compliance with the regulations. In my opinion and my assessments, the construction did not comply with the approved document at the time and would not have complied with the regulations at the time of construction.
Brilliant, that's great, thank you, Neil. One question here is, can the working watch be reduced by adding further buildings to it? Just to let you know on that one, we have worked with Magellan House, who are a part of now the estate system, and we have worked with Franklin House, who are also part of the working watch system. There isn't anyone other building on the dock that we're aware of with this problem or with a working watch in place. So the system that's being used is being exploited the best it can in terms of coverage. We've been doing lots of testing on this system to make sure that it would meet the requirements. We have the QR codes that they scan when they're walking outside, and we make sure that everybody is fully trained on that system. So the system is at the adequate amount of people, so we're making sure that we're hitting the requirements of visiting each area of the building every 16 minutes roughly. So that's a really key factor to maintain and maintain that, while the system is in place, it is being done to the best of its ability. One of the other questions is there any other cheaper alternatives? As Neil has mentioned earlier, the fire alarm upgrade is always a possibility. We have done a cost analysis on this, and it's really important to remember that not only is it about installing a fire alarm here, it's also got to be considered that you have to remove the fire alarm once the building returns to a stake-up policy. Once you put them two costings together and you look at the time frame in which we want to get to in the future, and how fast we want to see remediation completed, which along with the government guidance at the minute is looking for a Q1 2021 start. Once you start to look at them elements, you start to realise that once you do a cost analysis on this, a fire alarm isn't financially the most practical solution. If the same safety measures can be retained by using a working watch, then that's our recommendation at the moment. However, we constantly communicate with West Yorkshire Fire, and if there was any requirement that we had to progress such an action, we've already got some fire alarm specialists that have been looking at the building. We've priced it up several times, and we'd be happy to move forward with that. However, we are working just to keep the cost down for leaseholders on this. As you know, a lot of the questions is about the cost. So I hope that's really important. One of the questions that have just come in is, how will leaseholders be consulted in the future? We will constantly be in communication with you. We've started up our communication promises, so we're going to be sending the emails out every month at least, and much more frequently as we can. If we have any information in the meantime between the newsletters, we'll be sending special bulletins, and we intend to try and keep a question and answer session such as this going. This will adapt as we do it. I understand that the format's been a little bit different tonight, and that we want to develop this. It is the first time that we've done such a thing through the internet due to obviously COVID. There's some questions about the sinking funds and will they be utilised. The sinking funds at the moment have been retained. We have had to utilise an element of that towards the Laking Watch in the early stages that it was deployed. We'll confirm the figures of where they're up to leaseholders in the future. We've made a note of that, and that'll come out on the newsletter, and we will progress that as we can. And in terms of the utilisation of them towards the project, there may be an element that can go forward with this, and that there will be an element that we can utilise from the sinking funds. But at the moment, we would recommend that we see how much the cost is first, and then we make decisions such as that. As I say, a lot of the questions that are coming in are about the costings, and just to reiterate that point, we don't have the costings at this time. We'll have the costings in the future once we've been able to get a remediation plan in place, and we've been able to get the costings once we've completed a thorough tender exercise. There will be a cost assessor appointed as part of the team in the future, and their job will be to make sure that we're getting the best costings from the industry, and to make sure that the prices we're paying is in line with industry standards. The question's just come in now. Will the works for Mackenzie and Salle be billed separately? Yeah, while we are doing the presentations together, I think it's really important to remember that each building is its own project, and each building will move at different stages. We have kept them quite together because they're all in close proximity to each other, but it's really important to remember each building has its own project, has its own reports, and that's how we'll be progressing that. One of the questions here is, who signed the completion certificate for the building, and did the NHBC sign off the building? The building was signed off by the City Council Building Control at the time of construction. There is obviously various elements to look into that, and I understand you're probably asking from an angle of, is there any liability there? Once again, to go back to the earlier point, the solicitors are reviewing the liability, and if there is any potential person that could be liable for any of the situation that we found ourselves in, we will obviously progress that. The next question that we've had is the build safety fund is rumoured to be allocated based on the priority need of the building remediation. They've asked for Neil's opinion on how do we rank in terms of need. I wouldn't think it'd be appropriate for Neil to be able to comment on where where we're going to fit in that fund. The reason being for that is, there's all different elements, and nobody's actually quite clear yet on how the fund will be allocated and how they will choose what amounts are allocated across the board. The government is still working on that. They're issuing guidance, and once we have a case allocation, once we've got a case handler, we'll be able to work on that. We'll be able to understand the government's position and ask them questions which I know everybody wants the answer to. We want the answer to, and we want to be able to give you the answer. So one of the next questions we've received is, do you know roughly when we'll be able to sell the property? You can obviously attempt to sell your property, but we are aware that the certain financial lenders are not prepared to lend on the properties until an EWS 1 form is completed. If we go back to the earlier information, that'll be what we're calling stage 11 of the remediation advice. That will be on the final sign-off of the building once the remedial work has been completed. We've already got it as part of the specification that the EWS 1 will be included, and it will be completed by a suitable building surveyor. As such, we don't have a fixed date for that, because obviously each building will have a different finish date, and once we have a tender in place, once we understand who will be conducting the work and being able to progress that forward, that's when we'll know roughly. We can't give a time frame on that. I know some people saying, so by August next year will I be able to sell my property? We're not able to give full clarity on that until we know how long each project will take. But as soon as we know, we'll let you guys know. As soon as we've got the specification in place, we'll let you know, and we'll probably have some rough time frames of how long it's going to take to remediate the building.
Connor, can I just come in on that as
Yeah.
well? It is possible that if the funding is approved, that would release lending and mortgages again, because what the mortgage companies are obviously worried about is that they may at some point have to contribute to a reclad project, but if the government has committed to fund it, that might ease those fears.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks, Neil. And yeah, no, you've got a very valid point. A lot of the mortgage and financial institutes are worried about any potential leaseholder not being able to continue to pay the mortgage should they be hit with an unexpected bill. We will obviously be able to provide letters and other information in the future once we know if any funding has been granted. We do remain hopeful that we will get a good element of funding. We haven't had any reason to doubt that we're not eligible for some funding, but unfortunately, as everybody knows, that the government pot is only so big, and we are one of many applicants to that pot. So one question is, would the insurance not cover these works? No, the buildings insurance doesn't cover the cost of remediation to any cladding system on the building. One of the questions is, what is the issues if we don't get the Section 20 documents or the state aid declarations returned? The state aid declarations are really important, and I think we should really stress this out to leaseholders that this responsibility to get these back to us. We will push and we will work with any leaseholder that needs help on these forms, and we'll be there to support you every step of the way. We've always said that we're here to support leaseholders, and we'll work on that. But we must stress the importance of getting these back. This could hold up the funding application in the future, and that's why we've chosen to start it now, to make sure that we're able to provide that information when it's required. We understand that it's going to take a lot of organisation from our part to get them out, to get them back, to keep the track. But that's what we're here for at the end of the day, and that's our role in this project, to make sure that things are moving forward properly and that things are coordinated in the correct manner. One of the questions here, which Neil might be able to provide a little bit of background on, is how intrusive will the remediation work be? Is it likely that we'd have to leave our flats during the course of works?
So I think it will vary from wall system to wall system. There will be quite extensive remediation works, but I don't think it will be necessary to vacate flats.
Brilliant, thanks, Neil. One question is, how realistic is your programme and time frames? In all honesty, a lot relies on obviously the funding application, which is where our primary focus is at the minute. We will work to whatever the government wants us to work to, and we'll make sure that any information they need on any of them dates is provided to them at the earliest opportunity. That will really set the tempo in which we move forward this project. We will obviously be continuing the project and doing it at the earliest possible stage anyway, but we want to make sure that we're getting everything at every step of the way for the government funding application. That is the fundamental part that we've got to remember, that safety is first here, and everything we can do to release the burden from leaseholders as well will be done. Sorry about this, just flicking through some of the questions that have been highlighted through to us. Another question regarding the EWS 1 form: could this not be completed when works have started? No, unfortunately, the building surveyor that completes this will need to assess and say that they are happy that the build's being done correctly, that they're happy where the fire barriers are, for example, which is a key element towards that form, and that will be then satisfy them so that they're able to put their signature on the EWS 1 form for the future. One of the next questions is, once again, are the NHBC involved, and is there any warranty we can claim on? Unfortunately, the buildings have passed the warranty phase. They've gone past that a couple of years ago now, so unfortunately we did make contact, and we just confirmed that that was the case and that we was out of the warranty period. And that, it's unfortunate that that's where we are at this time. Sorry guys, we're just catching up. I think we might have covered quite a few of the questions there. One of the questions here is, should we be looking at design options now and then moving forward? Yes, no. So we've got the quotes, as I say, incoming for the next steps, which includes the design elements. We'll be looking at progressing that. Now the freeholder will be getting a copy of them quotes, and we'll be able to make a decision moving on who that appointment will be in hopefully the next couple of weeks. We'll keep you informed with that once that appointment's made. That'll really begin the next step of implementing the remediation advice. When it comes down to it, this will put us ahead of the game, in our opinion. This will really set the benchmark for starting to implement the remedial advice that we need to implement, which is the key element here. The sooner we get the remediation completed, the sooner the buildings are deemed to be meeting the standards, and then we're able to cross that bridge and get that EWS form, which will make it so that leaseholders are able to not only feel comfortable in their own homes and safe, but also be able to remortgage or sell the property if that's what they do. It is now come to the end of our hour. We do want to reiterate the fact that we will be doing sessions such as this in the future. We'll obviously take the feedback from this session, so please do reach out to us with any feedback. I just want to sign off with a message to say that we are here to help you guys, and we want to answer as much communication as possible. If you keep questions coming into the Lead Stock email address, we promise we will get to them. We will provide you with answers and provide you with everything that we've got. And me or someone on our team will reach out to you and provide you with anything that we can, and really keep you up to date. And we hope that this session is beneficial to yourselves, and I look forward to speaking to everyone again in the future. And I think it's also just worth giving a big thank you to Neil, who's obviously joined the session and provided us some real great information, and will no doubt be working with us for the future of this project. Thanks Neil for that. Brilliant. So yes, we're going to end the stream, and thanks for everyone's time tonight.